The night moves differently. Light stretch into streaks and motion is etched across time. In the city, motion never really stops, but with long exposure, we decide what stands still and what keeps moving. We're not just capturing what's in front of us, we're revealing what the eye alone can't see. It's the art of bending time, shaping motion, and turning a restless city into something deliberate. And once we understand how to control it, you'll never look at the night the same way again.
But here's the question. Have you ever tried long exposure at night only to end up with blown out highlights, shaky trails, or just a messy shot that didn't look anything like what you imagined? If so, you're not alone. Long exposure demands control. We're not just letting in more light, we're deciding how that light appears in our shot. We choose what stays sharp and what turns into motion. Every frame has a balance between movement and stillness, and that's exactly what we'll break down. In my last video, we explored the fundamentals of night photography, how to expose for low light, balance your settings, and capture the atmosphere of the night. But long exposure changes the way you work. Instead of simply adjusting brightness, you control time itself. You choose when to let movement flow and when to hold it still. This time, we'll go deeper and break down how to capture clean and dynamic light trails, control artificial light without losing detail, use motion to tell a stronger visual story, and we'll go over the mistakes that can ruin a long exposure and how to avoid them. If you've ever struggled with making a long exposure work in an unpredictable urban environment, this is the video for you. So let's get started.
Night photography is all about working with limited light, but long exposure takes that limitation and turns it into a creative advantage. Instead of capturing a single moment, you're capturing the passage of time itself. With a fast shutter speed, motion is frozen, headlights stay crisp, pedestrians are still, and reflections remain sharp. But with a long exposure, those same elements transform. Headlights stretch into glowing ribbons, crowds blur into ghostly figures, neon lights blend into fluid streams of color. This is where long exposure truly stands apart because it doesn't just document a scene, it reveals a movement, flow, and change. A still image becomes a visual record of time itself. And while the effects can feel almost magical, achieving them isn't about luck. It's about precision, technique, and control. Capturing this transformation isn't as simple as slowing down the shutter. Without the right setup, details can get lost, highlights can blow out, and motion can become distracting rather than intentional. The foundation of a strong long exposure starts before you even press the shutter. Stability, lens choice, and light control all shape the final image. Let's break down the gear and setup you'll need to capture clean, controlled long exposures in the city. Before we move on, if this video has shifted the way you see the frame or provided any value at all, please consider hitting the like button. It helps more people find the content and keeps the channel growing. And if you'd like to see more videos like this as you continue your journey, subscribing ensures that you won't miss what's next. Thanks for watching, and now let's get back to it.
Long exposure in the city isn't just about setting a long shutter speed. It's about managing the chaos around you. Vibrations, unpredictable lighting, and constant movement can all ruin a shot if you're not prepared. So let's go over how to get yourself set up for success.
Unwanted movement is one of the biggest threats to a sharp long exposure. If your camera shifts even slightly during the exposure, the entire shot loses clarity. So having a sturdy tripod can help keep the camera locked down and ensure that your light trails stay clean and defined. But stability isn't just about the tripod, it's also about where you set it up. Shooting on a bridge, a wooden walkway, or an area with heavy traffic can introduce vibrations that transfer to your camera. So if you're in one of these locations, widen your tripod stands, Use a weighted hook for extra stability, or brace one of the legs against a solid surface like a wall or railing to minimize movement. Even pressing the shutter button can introduce just enough movement to soften the shot. The easiest way to avoid this is by using your camera's built-in self-timer. Setting it to a 2 or 5 second delay lets the camera settle before the exposure starts. For more control, most modern cameras have companion apps that allow you to trigger the shutter from your phone. If you're using Sony, look for Imaging Edge Mobile, or for Canon, it's Camera Connect, and for Nikon, check out SnapBridge. Many cameras also support Bluetooth remotes or voice activation, making it even easier to time your shots without ever touching the camera. Lens choice plays a bigger role in long exposure than most people realize. In a city, a wide angle lens is usually the best option because it allows you to capture more of the architecture, streets, and light trails in a single frame. A focal length between 14 to 35 millimeters works well for most urban shots. At these lengths, you can emphasize perspective, use light trails as leading lines, and frame expansive cityscapes without distortion becoming a major issue. Since long exposure typically requires stopping down to f8 or f11, depth of field really isn't a concern. What matters more is lens sharpness and edge to edge clarity. Having the right setup eliminates the small errors that can ruin a shot, but gear is only part of the equation. You'll also need to know how to fine tune your camera settings, and that's exactly what we'll be breaking down next. Long exposure is a balancing act. Too much light and your highlights blow out. Too little and your details disappear into shadows. And if your timing is off, motion can look chaotic instead of intentional. That's why mastering exposure isn't just about brightness, it's about shaping light and movement with precision. Shutter speed is what defines a long exposure. The longer it stays open, the more movement the camera records, but that movement has to be controlled. The right shutter speed depends on what you're trying to capture. At around 5 to 10 seconds, you start to see controlled motion blur. Car headlights and tail lights stretch into streaks, but you can still make out the shapes of vehicles if they're moving slowly. Pedestrians walking through the frame blur slightly, but they don't vanish. Pushing it to 15 or 20 seconds creates longer, more continuous light trails. The flow of traffic becomes smoother, and moving people fade into ghost-like figures, barely visible but still present. Beyond 30 seconds, motion takes over. Traffic turns into ribbons of light stretching across the frame, and pedestrians disappear completely, leaving only the static elements of the city behind. For most urban scenes, a shutter speed between 15 and 25 seconds is a solid starting point. It's long enough to create defined light trails without blowing out highlights or losing structure in the composition. For most cityscapes, ISO 100 to 200 gives you the cleanest image, especially when shooting long exposure, but there are times when you need to raise it. If you're working in an area with minimal ambient light, bumping ISO to 400 or 800 can help maintain exposure without overextending your shutter speed. Modern cameras handle ISO far better than older models, so don't be afraid to push it if needed, especially if you're using a full frame sensor. And in post-processing, noise reduction can clean up high ISO shots without sacrificing detail. If you want sharper focus throughout the frame, f8 to f11 is your best bet. But if you're shooting a street portrait with light trails behind your subject, opening up to f4 or f5.6 can help separate them from the background. But just keep in mind, at wider apertures, bright lights may appear softer and depth of field becomes shallower, so precise focusing is key. So how does this all come together? If you're shooting light trails, start with 15 to 25 seconds, ISO 100, and f8. That'll give you smooth, defined motion without blowing out highlights. And if you want to show motion in a crowd, go shorter. 5 to 10 seconds lets people blur without disappearing entirely. And if you're after a balanced cityscape, a range of 10 to 20 seconds at f8 is a great starting point. Now, these aren't rigid numbers. You'll tweak them depending on available light and how much motion you want to capture. But once you understand how shutter speed, ISO, and aperture interact, exposure stops being a guessing game and starts being a tool you control.
Long exposure transforms the way movement interacts with light. In the city, that means more than just capturing traffic. It's about using time to shape motion and turn everyday scenes into something visually striking. Let's explore how to push beyond the basics and create images that stand out.
Light trails are one of the defining effects of long exposure. But creating a compelling shot takes more than just slowing down the shutter. It's about working with the rhythm of the city, timing, framing, and balancing exposure. Traffic flow has a huge impact on the final image. A packed intersection fills the frame with overlapping streaks of red and white, giving a sense of energy and chaos. But on a quieter street where only a few cars pass at a time, the trails feel more deliberate, adding a cleaner, more controlled look. Framing is just as important. Shooting straight down a road creates a vanishing point, pulling the viewer's eye through the frame. A higher vantage point offers a broader perspective, showing the full motion of the city. And if you include foreground elements like a traffic light, a parked car, or an urban landmark, it helps anchor the composition, making the movement feel more dynamic. Then there's color. Headlights and taillights provide a natural contrast, cool white light moving one way, deep red moving the other. But in areas with neon signs, billboards, and streetlights, those extra tones can make the scene even more vibrant. By being intentional with angles and exposure, you can use those colors to enhance the overall composition rather than letting them overpower the shot. Long exposure is a powerful way to show movement beyond traffic. Pedestrians crossing a busy intersection, buses gliding through the frame, crowds shifting in and out of the scene. All of this adds energy to an image. The key is contrast. If everything in the frame is moving, the shot loses structure. A static element like a street sign, a bus stop, or even a person standing still creates a focal point that makes the surrounding motion feel more deliberate. Shutter speed plays a major role here. A 1 to 3 second exposure blurs people just enough to create a sense of movement while keeping their shapes recognizable. Push it to 5 or 10 seconds and they begin to fade into soft streaks. At 20 seconds or more, anyone walking through the scene disappears completely, leaving only the city behind. By carefully balancing motion and stillness, these shots capture the pulse of an urban environment in a way that a single frame can't. Long exposure is usually about stability, but controlled movement can create striking, abstract effects. One method is zoom blur. Twisting the zoom ring during an exposure stretches the light outward, making it look like it's exploding from the center of the frame. This works especially well with neon heavy scenes, where bright signs and traffic lights burst into streaks of color. Another technique is slow handheld movement. By gently panning the camera, tilting slightly, or introducing slight circular motions during exposure, you can create fluid, painterly streaks, turning an ordinary cityscape into something abstract and surreal. Instead of recording a static scene, the shot becomes an interpretation of movement, light, and energy. These effects aren't about capturing reality. They're about pushing creative boundaries and using motion in a way that transforms the final image. Try different speeds and directions of movement to see how light reacts in the frame.
While these creative techniques can make a city feel more alive, they also come with challenges. Unwanted blur, overexposed highlights, noise in the shadows. Any of these can ruin a shot if they're not handled correctly. So, next, we'll break down how to solve the most common problems photographers face when shooting long exposures at night.
Even with a tripod, slight vibrations from cars, subways, or foot traffic can ruin sharpness. Bridges, wooden walkways, and metal grates are the most common culprits. If you have to shoot in one of these areas, widen your tripod stands, lower the center column, use a sandbag or your camera bag as a weight, and when possible, press one of the legs of the tripod against a solid surface. These small adjustments can dramatically increase stability. City lights can be brutal. Street lamps, billboards, and headlights can easily blow out, even at lower ISOs. One solution is to expose for the highlights and recover the shadows in post, but that only works if you're shooting in RAW. Another option is to slightly underexpose your frame intentionally, especially if your composition includes strong light sources. This approach works best when bright artificial lights dominate your composition. Preserve the highlights first and carefully lift the shadows later. Long exposure works best when motion is either cleanly recorded or strategically blurred, but sometimes people linger in the frame, walk halfway through, or stop moving entirely, breaking the rhythm of your shot. The best way to handle this is patience. Wait for the right moment or take several shots and composite them later. Even at base ISO, long exposures can introduce noise, especially in darker parts of the frame. This is where proper exposure and post-processing matter. Slightly overexposing your shadows and pulling them back later helps preserve detail. Use selective noise reduction to clean up problem areas without softening the entire image. If the histogram shows your shadows are crushed, you'll probably get grainy looking dark areas. It's better to expose just enough to keep detail in the shadows and then darken them gently in post if need be. This technique works best when your scene is mostly dark, where shadows dominate and there are fewer bright highlights to protect. Cities rarely have consistent light temperatures. You'll often have sodium vapor lights, cool LEDs, and neon signs all competing in the same shot. This can introduce ugly color cast or tonal imbalances. To protect this, shoot with a fixed white balance rather than auto, and plan to fine-tune color in post. You can also use HSL adjustments to correct or even lean into certain tones, turning a flaw into part of your aesthetic. The most striking long exposures come from intention and preparation. Knowing how to manage exposure, stabilize your camera, and adapt to your environment turns problems into opportunities. These challenges don't go away, but once you know how to handle them, they stop being obstacles and become part of your creative process. Post processing isn't about fixing mistakes. It's about fine tuning your image to bring out the full impact of the long exposure. And there are a few key things that can make a big difference. First, let's talk about exposure. One of the biggest issues in long exposure photography is getting the balance right between highlights and shadows. If the street lights or neon signs look too bright, you can bring them down by adjusting the highlights while lifting the shadows just enough to keep detail in the darker areas. The key is subtlety. Too much, and the image starts looking unnatural. Next, sharpness. Now, in long exposure photography, not everything needs to be sharp. You want your stationary elements, things like buildings, street signs, or parked cars, to stay crisp, while motion blur stays soft and fluid. So instead of applying sharpening across the whole image, try targeting it only where you need it. If you're editing in Lightroom, you can use the masking slider in the detail panel to apply sharpening selectively so you're not sharpening the parts of the image that are meant to be blurred. Then there's color, especially in light trails. You want those streaks of light to stand out, but not in a way that looks fake. A great trick is to use HSL sliders, the hue, saturation, and luminance, to fine-tune the exact color of the light trails. If the reds are too strong, you can tone them down. If you want blues or yellows to pop a little more, just push up the saturation slightly. Small adjustments go a long way. And finally, noise reduction. Since long exposures naturally introduce a little noise, especially in the shadows, The trick is to reduce it without erasing natural texture. A good approach is to apply noise reduction selectively, only in the darker areas where it's most noticeable. If you're in Lightroom, you can use the luminance noise reduction slider, but be careful because too much and the image will start to look too smooth like plastic. So, to sum it up, control your exposure to keep details balanced, sharpen only where it matters, fine tune your colors to make light trails pop, and reduce noise just enough to keep the image clean without losing texture. These small refinements make a huge difference and bring out the best in your long exposure shots.
Long exposure is about seeing the city in a new way, finding rhythm in motion, shaping light to your vision, and capturing something that feels just out of reach. The techniques we cover today are just the start. The more you experiment, the more control you gain, and the more your shots become truly intentional. You now have the tools to master long exposure, whether it's capturing dynamic light trails, balancing artificial light, or shaping motion with intent. Every scene is an opportunity to create something intentional and unique. So get out there and shoot. Push your creativity, test new ideas, and make the city your canvas. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing for more deep dive tutorials. And if you'd like to support the work that goes into these videos, you can buy me a coffee. The link is in the description. Every bit helps me keep creating content that helps you grow as a photographer. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one.